CosmicRadio.TV.
Welcome to Cinematalkraphy. We watch movies with you so you don't have to.
Welcome to Cinematography. I'm your host, Roberto Villegas, joined by...
Brent Hughes.
And this is the first time you've ever seen me solo in my apartment. But because of some weird car issue that Brandt is dealing with, I think it's like he hasn't quite figured out how to escape the black hole that is his apartment, or some type of weird gravity well or something like that, some other spacey term. We're doing this over Skype, and it's kind of the first time we've ever done this.
Yeah.
It's kind of cool. Actually, I like this. I like this idea a bit better. Now I've got room to breathe and room to do all these other hand dance motions and things like that, because that's what Robert does.
It's also nice for me because I don't have to drive 45 minutes to get to your house.
Yes, and even then, we knew that this was going to be a weird kind of movie, because you have been excited for this movie since, I think it's... I do not mean to make this a pun. I swear I'm not making this a pun.
Roberto.
But you've been excited for this film since its inception. I didn't mean to make it a Nolan pun.
Just cut it off there. Episode's over. We're done.
That was not my intent. I wasn't trying to make a pun. It happened because I was like, I'm gonna say the word. Like, the word's kind of like, it's gonna be the I word, and I realized, no, wait a minute, that's a Nolan film name. Oh crap, I'm gonna go through with this, aren't I? Because I can't leave this. I'm being sucked into the black hole. I'm going through the event horizon. I have to go to the other end. If I don't, I'm not gonna win. I don't even know what that means.
Next, you're going to be like, oh, and I still have this ticket stub. I like to think of it as a memento of me watching the movie.
No, I think of this more as my darkest night. Oh! No, not even close. But regardless of that fact, we had sort of, when it came to seeing Interstellar, we had to sort of play between the two different time periods of us going to films, because basically... it didn't even mean that they're coming without me thinking about them. They're in me. It's as if a book is talking to me in Morse code and telling me these things over a watch channel. We'll talk about that later. And I think it was you that was like, okay, I can't make it that Monday, but I'm sure as hell gonna make it that Tuesday. And I was like, there's no way I can make it that Tuesday. Like we had, like, you had pretty much, resigned yourself. I'm gonna see this as soon as I can.
Pretty much, yeah.
And I knew that was the case, and so, within this, we kind of planned out who would see it first, who would see it second, kind of thing. But I made sure, because I figured it'd be a great artifact to have, of having Brandt sort of give his movie thoughts before he saw it, because you were the most excited for this film.
Yeah, totally.
So go for it.
Yeah, I was just gonna say, every year I kind of pick 1 to 2 movies to kind of champion throughout the year, and Interstellar was definitely the top of that list this year. Yeah,
no, for sure. It's definitely one of the movies that this winter is probably one of the most anticipated films. Mm-hmm. So we're gonna quickly cut to that, because I feel, you know what? Let's just hear what past Brandt had to say about this film.
It's about an hour before the screening, and I'm gonna give you my take. My impressions of what this film could be. I've been massively hyped about this movie for quite some time. It feels very much like Inception felt, right? Because Inception, I was super big on, and I remember leading up to it. And if you listen to our Inception commentary, you'll hear some of this. But they released like images of the briefcase that they used to incept people, and I just remember feeling like, this is the coolest thing on the planet. This is so cool. And at that point, I didn't want to see anything else. I didn't want to see trailers. I didn't want to hear what people had to say about it. I just wanted to see it. And so I ended up seeing it a few times in theaters. And this feels so much like that. It feels like this huge, massive thing that Nolan has put together that, it rides this weird line between, being a huge blockbuster success and being on the fringe of mainstream enough that it kind of puts people off in just how ambitious it is and how interesting it is. I feel like a lot of people don't like to be challenged and they don't like interesting things. But this is gonna be interesting, and this is gonna be big, and this is gonna be huge, and this is gonna be awesome. Hopefully, right? So I don't know much about it going in. I do know from what you can glean from the first trailer. I did see the first trailer. It was too juicy of an opportunity to pass up. And so I already have some of the images in my mind, but I trust that Nolan had enough power over the creative output of the first trailer that he didn't give away anything too huge. I've got an idea of what the film might be. I know some of the elements, some of the set pieces, maybe. I know that Matthew McConaughey's in it, and I'm really interested to, hopefully this is a continuing stepping stone for his path into this weird kind of interesting place that McConaughey has been doing. With Mud, he was fantastic in Mud, and I really like that now he has some of the clout that he can get interesting roles. You see, even though he was doing all of these romantic comedies and stuff, at the same time he was doing movies like Frailty, right? He was doing really strange, like dark indie movies. And so now he's this dude, and I think that's great. Other than that, I don't really know anything about it. So I'm really excited. You should, if you were watching this right now and you haven't seen it yet, you should go into it clean. Go into it fresh. Try and watch it knowing as little as possible. I mean, I'm gonna recommend that for any film, really, but Interstellar especially. Because it could be this grand experience like I had with Inception, and it ended up being so much better than I could have predicted. So we're gonna take that break, and I'll be right back with my thoughts. Yeah. This movie's gonna be out of this world. Out of this world.
And we're back from the past. We're right back in the present here.
Whoa!
Now, though, what's funny is I've yet to really see the footage, but you've told me in kind of talking that you were just like super excited. Like,
yeah.
Can you think back to what that feeling was like prior to watching the film? Because again, you were so pumped for this movie.
Yeah, and it was tough to put into words. I haven't. I recorded that pre-screening thing a few days prior to now, and I haven't seen it since. My thoughts, but it's one of these things where just I went into it not knowing so much, and I kind of had these rough ideas of what it might be, but there's something about a new Nolan film that just really, it feels like this big event, and it's most big events, especially like film events,
right?
I just don't care about. I mean, you have like, say what you will about the Twilight movies, those are big events.
No, for sure,
those are huge.
Yeah, I mean they bring in the money, they bring in the people. They're enough of a spectacle of a film. Whether they're good films or not doesn't matter in this regard, because enough people are lining up. Same thing with like the Harry Potter films or the Star Wars films of earlier times.
They're all cultural cornerstones.
Exactly.
Right?
I would totally agree with you there. And a Nolan film for sure has been. I mean, we've had obviously his sort of resurgence into the popular culture, and I say that in terms of like that would be like the Dark Knight films and his sort of Batman trilogy, but even movies like Inception, as you mentioned, and even Memento were still phenomenal films and still sort of have that. So having a Nolan film coming down the pipeline, especially for you, a huge fan of that director, you were really pumped for this. I wasn't so much as pumped for you. I mean, as pumped as you were for the film.
Sure.
Only because I didn't really know what to take of it. I mean, Nolan is a great director. I knew I was going to see a good film no matter what, but I wasn't certain what I was going to get myself into because it's a space movie. It's a lot of really crazy long-distance space travel, and so many films have done that sort of thing in various lights that I don't know what to trust anymore when it comes to that, you know?
All right.
But that being said, Brandt did record his own sort of immediate reaction. We'll link that to the show notes here, and we'll have it on the channel so you guys can kind of catch it and hear Brandt's immediate reaction. But this is our proper reaction to the film, and much like our other content, if you've not seen it, this is of course going to be spoiler-ridden. It's just
totally.
how we do our thing, and that's how it is. So if you'd like to check out the film, do check it out. I will say that no matter what I say right now, it is a movie well worth watching. But I do have some issues, but that's not enough to pull it out.
The less you know, the better as far as I'm concerned. So.
Exactly.
We must reach far beyond our own lifespans. We must think not as individuals, but as a species. We must confront the reality of interstellar travel. Murph, I love you forever. I'm coming back.
Let's go through the things that we both liked. I thought it's McConaughey, right? That's who the yeah. I thought McConaughey did a phenomenal job.
Yeah, I'm so happy that we're. I think I mentioned it a little bit in my solo reaction stuff, but I'm so glad we're in this world where Matthew McConaughey is growing into this well-respected actor who has range and can do interesting things.
Yes.
And you see that he's been kind of interested in doing these things.
No, for sure. I mean, because as of late, he has totally had this resurgence. For me, I think the movie that really kicked it off in my head
was Mud?
Yes, was Mud. Mud was like, oh my God, this guy is phenomenal. This guy is a tremendous actor with a lot of range, a lot of character stuff. Because again, Matthew McConaughey has always been that pretty boy and that kind of thing, but letting him play those sort of stranger roles, I say, Mud is a stranger role for him. Yeah. Has totally made him like one of my top actors, and it's I don't think I can think of a film I've seen as of late with Matthew McConaughey that has not been stellar. Has not been a great film.
Interstellar.
I said it again. This is hard because all these words I'm saying are in my normal vocabulary. It's not like I'm changing it for the movie. Like I've said stellar before, but now that we're in space movies, it comes out. But yeah, I thought Matthew McConaughey did a great job. I thought pretty much everybody had a great job. Even the robot characters. I don't know who the voice actors were for TARS and things like that. But I dug that they added this sort of like humor kind of algorithm or whatever to it. It almost felt kind of like the computer in Her. They felt like real real characters and human characters and things like that. Everything was great. I thought the effects were gorgeous. And
absolutely.
And even that opening kind of shots in sort of like, I guess for lack of better words, the Dust Bowl of Earth. Those were super powerful. Yeah. I couldn't quite tell what year we were in. I knew we were in sort of the not so distant future, but that's the only thing that really bugged me was that I couldn't pinpoint the year.
Yeah, to me it felt like, I don't know, 150 years out, something like that.
Something like that. I mean, like the one big fact that really flagged me, that got, like the first part that I got really angry for, was when it was in the school, the parent-teacher conference, and they say, your daughter brought in her like a federal book. We're not using those because it has some lies, like the fact that we didn't go to the moon, and I was like, what? No, we're not. I'm not having this world. I'm not having this future exist in my life.
Yeah, that's such a great little moment.
Well, because like what was weird is that there are people right now that truly honestly believe that it was a hoax and that we didn't go to the moon and that there's not a refractor, even though there is a refractor and you can do all the cool science experiments with it to proving that we were there on the moon, for Lord's sakes. And it was like, oh my God, this is actually becoming true. Like I was expecting like at one point they're gonna say, yeah, and evolution wasn't a thing, and God, like I was expecting some bizarre part happen. It was kind of a weird twist of fate because of the idea that if in the future we run out of kind of resources and food and things like that, that what's going to be valuable then will not be valuable now. Like right now, you could argue that engineers are in high demand, tech people are in high demand, things like that. But in a future where we don't have the resources to actually sustain life, you might need more farmers and agricultural people.
Yeah, sure. I mean, it was such an interesting way to do some world building, just to be like, we need to disincentivize people from thinking, basically.
Yeah.
And really, we just need like single focus people, and farming is all that matters, and that's all we care about, and nothing else happened or existed.
And that was, and much like a lot of other Nolan films, I tend to always get really fascinated with the world. Like Inception, I got very fascinated with the world around the dream thing, the whole dream machine and all that kind of stuff. And much like this movie, I got the same exact idea. I was like, man, this world's kind of cool. I wish I could learn how it got to this point. Because, I mean, there's a little bit of brief mention where it says something like that the overindulgence of the 20th century caused all this crap to happen. And sort of the professor talks about it, teacher, things like that. And it was really cool just to have, like, the craziest part about that whole sequence, that little brief parent-teacher conference, was the fact that this teacher believed her own bullshit, and like really utterly like, yeah, we had Russia went bankrupt and things like that. I'm like, the history books had been changed so radically that she just believed whatever it was that was spat in her face. It was sort of funny and sort of bizarre.
Yeah, she was of the generation that has already been indoctrinated with
and it was so weird
structure.
to have that happen because, like obviously, Mike, I am of the McConaughey generation in this universe, and even Murphy, his daughter, is of Murphy. I think might have been my favorite secondary character of the film because she sort of straddled that weird line of being this like precocious 10-year-old at that time, and believing what her dad's telling her about science because that's what her dad's known, that's what her dad teaches, and having to like deal with all these other, like, for lack of better words, Luddites that are forming the nation out of necessity. And that's what the strangest part was too, was that everything wasn't because they wanted to breed ignorance or something like that, not because of some like weird, genetic thing or whatever, not like your Brave New World or your 1984 kind of dystopia, not even a dystopia, but the future, but because out of necessity, because we need to do this to keep the race alive.
Yeah.
So that was great. All that was good. And then we get into space. And not so much the beginning of space, because somewhere along the line, I don't exactly know when or where. I don't quite remember where. But I kind of predicted what was going to happen at the end. In the idea, like, I think it was when they started talking about the black hole. Like, they'd already got shot in space. They'd already gone through the wormhole, which, again, this is, if our last science-y discussion is anything of, I think the last time we talked about this sort of film and our weird issues with science and films, at least my personal issues with science and films, I don't think we recorded at the time because we weren't doing the show then, I don't think.
No.
But it was... Gravity. Which, another kind of weird tie-in title to this, never mind. Was Gravity, and that, there's that moment that sort of took my disbelief out, but I'm still smart enough to say, okay, the movie's good, whatever. With this movie, when it introduced the concept of, I think it was like the event horizon of a black hole, and something along those lines, I can't remember the exact wording, but somewhere around that point in time, either after the first time dilation when they went to the other planet, or something happened, my brain clicked in and said, they're going to have these motherfuckers go back in time, aren't they? And they're going to be the ones that message stay to fucking young little Murphy.
I think sort of similarly, although not as distinctly as your experience. There was some time during the film where I do remember thinking the idea of, oh, it might be kind of interesting, and it would sync up just in the way that a lot of movies would if all of this was because of Cooper.
Yeah.
Right. So I definitely had that idea in my head before it happened. But I mean, I don't know if you want to dig too deep into it right now, but just that entire sequence where that is all revealed.
Yeah.
It is so incredibly well done. Such a phenomenal visual representation of everything.
See, that's where I have my disconnect with the film, because you're absolutely right. That sequence of showing time in the physical dimension, so to speak, in this three-dimensional space, that was a phenomenal graphical shot. That was so powerful shot. But the problem was for me at that point, that is where my sciencey brain kicked in and almost forced the suspension of disbelief. As that's where it kind of shattered and broke for me, in a sciencey way, because. And again, we're coming back to that same gravity discussion that we had, and you listeners are kind of getting that a taste of what that was, because when I got to that shot, like we're going in that horizon, I know in my head we're gonna fucking do this. We're gonna go back in time some way. He's gonna be able to talk to them somehow because he's the one that said the damn Morse code. And it gets there and it's like, well, you can affect gravity and shit like that. And it's like, well, god damn it, now I know everything that's gonna happen. And what bugged me about that whole shot, the only thing that really bugged me was that, did it bug you that Cooper didn't remember what he did?
Maybe a tiny bit. Are you speaking specifically of him coming into the room? And
him coming to the room, seeing the message stay, and all that stuff. Did it bug you that he didn't remember that?
And then just mostly because he was frustrated that he didn't respond to his attempts of communication? Not really. I mean, maybe a little bit, just in that, you would think he would probably remember that. But, I mean, then again, at that point, it's been 3 years since it happened, or something.
That's also the one thing we should mention. There's a lot of playing with some of the known theories of time. What's called one of Einstein's theories, the time dilation, as it's called.
Yeah.
Where
and I want to get into that a little bit more in just a minute.
Sure.
But yes, they do some interesting stuff with time.
Yeah, we'll come back to it, 'cause I'm curious what you want to get into, because there's a lot of really play with time for sure, and even the way it's shot near that end point, which we'll probably get into there. But the thing that bugged me was that once I got to that point, that's sort of when everything kicked off my brain of destroying that suspension, because ultimately up until that point, I believe, even if the science was wrong, and I have friends of mine who are very much like, no, the science is completely, utterly wrong, and we're completely angry about that. I can say a mutual friend of yours and I's, Jaime, had been very, very, I talked of a day, and he was very angry about some of the science. And I think Andrew Main of Don't Trust Andrew Main also had his issues with the science. And
he actually said the science was pretty good.
It is pretty good. It's actually very solid. It's surprisingly a lot of it is as, I'll say it this way: it's as good as I think it's going to get in a movie of this magnitude. Because once you start talking about that kind of space travel, and I mean over long distances, I'm not talking hundreds of thousands of miles. I'm talking light years, and that becomes a very large magnitude of distance. And when you start talking about things like wormholes and stuff like that, it starts to get very confusing very quickly if you don't even understand the idea. And they did a lot of the basic concepts of folding space, and that's this typical animation, the typical thing that they do, where they fold a piece of paper and poke a hole through. That's sort of the folding space mechanism they've had for years. But when you start talking about that, it becomes, you have to almost kind of keep a lot of this stuff in your head, and not everyone's gonna quite understand, that level of Einstein physics and quantum mechanics and things like that. So I did think the film did a great job of keeping it as simple as it could, but still using it to its benefit as a storytelling device.
Sure. Yeah.
But you want to get back into you want to talk about more about time, and I'm curious what you meant by that.
Sure. I mean, so for me, it was so fascinating because I went into the movie knowing about space, and I kind of knew a little bit about the Dust Bowl stuff, but I very specifically did not know. I did not even consider the implications of time, and they use it to great effect throughout the entire film, and it's really interesting because it's, you do consider the effects of, it takes a long time to get anywhere in space, so they have to go into their hyperbaric rest sleep chamber stuff just to get to Saturn, but you don't necessarily think about the relativity of time on different planets. I mean, I just read an article the other day that we have a clock that is now so specific that if you raise it up or down an inch, it measures the different speeds of time in those spaces. And so, I mean, even though that might be such a minuscule fraction of a second.
Yeah, fractions of seconds at that point.
It's something that you're not going to notice except for maybe over billions of years. You might get a slight desync in those spaces.
And even technically, the space station is on a faster time as well.
Sure, yeah.
But again, it's also fractions of seconds, not even enough to really matter. But when we start talking about, real distances in space, that's one of the things that a lot of scientists will talk about and sort of not argue, but sort of figure out, because when you start talking about time dilation and things like that, we're talking about things like in the extreme in the movie where 1 hour on a planet equals 7 hours in Earth time.
7 years.
7 years.
Yeah.
And that whether that's true or not in terms of actual science of that planet or whatever, it's the idea that exists, and that what I liked about Nolan doing that is that he added those effects in, because when he comes back from that surface, 23 years have passed, and it's like, oh man, he missed everything, and it's as if he'd went dead and communication had gone cold for 23 years. Which again is frightening. It's scary to think that. And even talk about the idea of that we're going to go down on here. Every hour costs this much time, and the idea that time becomes a resource that you just can't. That you have to almost think in a crazy concept, in a way of saying 1 hour is 7 years up there. We got to really think how that's going to work out and how we're going to do things, because that's if this doesn't, the idea when they get to the other planets there, and that not all of them are going to be viable, that they have to take a gamble of like, well, it's going to take an hour to go down there, but an hour compared to here is 7 years, and so it's going to essentially take 7 years, and that's 7 years worth of fuel here, and it's figuring out all of those different variables and saying, is it worth it? And I think that was a really cool, especially to add to the tension, because when you have a limited resource of something, and you're affecting it just by simply doing the mission, and not in a way that you as a human would normally perceive that you're doing. Because if you think an hour here, an hour there, they got plenty of fuel. It's only an hour. But no, it's 7 years, and that's 7 years of keeping life support on, doing all these other stuff like that. Even using minimal fuel, it's still 7 years of minimal fuel, and that can add up really quickly.
Yeah, and it's also just it makes you think about time in a slightly different way, just the implications of it, because just about every space film that you see, you're going to have fuel reserves, you're going to have food reserves, and all of those you need to balance with the mission and what you're doing and where you're going, but you rarely think of time as that. And so it's not, there is that layer of, oh, we're on the planet for an hour, that's 7 years of fuel that we're burning up on our docking station out in space, but that's also 7 years of human existence that we're passing up, and every second on this planet we're getting tremendously closer and closer to human extinction on Earth.
Right, exactly, and that's something they don't really talk about. Like a lot of space films never really address time dilation. Like the last time I'd seen that even talked about in a science fiction-y way was in video form was an anime. I don't even remember what anime it was, but it's the only. I think it was like some like mech kind of thing, and they had talked about how spending 30 minutes here is we already burned a year here or something like that, and they had talked about that. That's the only time I'd ever even remotely have seen anyone do that. And in a book form, it was like it was Ender's Game. It's rare that I've seen in science fiction people even address that. I mean, even Star Trek doesn't bother talking about that portion of space travel, which is a real thing. I mean, it is honestly, it is a phenomenon of physics and things like that. So it is something that has to be addressed. And that's one thing I really dug about this film, is not only they addressed it in a real kind of storyline, sciencey kind of way, but even in an emotional way, because we have our main character Cooper, who's still got a family back home and would one day want to see them, hopefully, but has to comprehend the idea that if I go down to this planet, it's going to be at least 7 years, and when he comes back and it's 23 years, he's hearing these messages from his daughter, his son, seeing the grandkid and things like that, and then hearing the message of like, I've lost hope with you being there because you haven't responded in 23 years, not knowing, and that's what was cool about how they showed time passage, not knowing that, because what he perceives as present is one thing, and what we as the audience perceive as present is one thing, but what's really happening in terms of the Earth time is an entirely different matter, and it's really cool how they juxtaposition those two things.
Yeah, totally. And also it's kind of neat because it's a technique in film that we see all the time, where we have a scene that takes 4 to 5 minutes, but in the time of the people in that scene, it might be 4 to 5 hours. Right. But this is just exponentially larger.
And that's what I dug about that, especially near the end sequence, the ending portion, where we see, I think it's on the ice planet. We see Cooper, or Coop, and I think it's Man, as the other officer. They're kind of fighting out of weird things of that. That we see this parallel time going on, where we do see what's happening in our present of Coop's life, and we see what's happening in sort of the present of the Earth's life, for lack of better words, in terms of time. And it's really cool to see those sort of go in parallel and how things happen, when the professor dies and how that works out in terms of time. I really dug that fact. I also dug the fact how they handled Man, by the way, how they handled the idea of having somebody live in isolation, because that's a scary thought. The whole Lazarus mission, the idea that you could potentially be going to your death, and not just a death of surrounded by people or other humans or things like that, but a slow, lonely death. Like, that is a scary thought to think about.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I
mean, it's frightening, and I liked how they approached it, because when we come back and we see, we introduce a Man and sort of his life, having him be, essentially lose it, I thought was a very, very real reaction.
Yeah. It's kind of neat thinking about it now, because I didn't fully piece it together, but so I at the time, but I was afraid it was going to pull a Sunshine, which you haven't seen yet.
Yeah.
But, some basic broad strokes of Sunshine. It starts off as this incredible, fantastic space exploration thing. They're traveling towards the sun. It's really well done and looks phenomenal, and it's really interesting. And then there's a turning point to where it basically becomes a survival horror kind of a weird thing where there's a monster in the ship, and the whole time I was concerned, oh no, I hope these robots don't turn on us. Oh no, I hope this doesn't happen.
That was also in the back of my mind too, because like we're going into space, we're going into deep space, we're going into a portion of space that because again, like the last time I saw Hollywood beyond, and I don't include Star Trek in this sort of Hollywood spec because they're kind of in their own world. I don't even consider any real science fiction. Like the last time I saw Hollywood really talk about faster than light travel or wormholes or folding space and things like that was Event Horizon, a really terrible horror film, very terrible horror film. And so for me, I kept having that in the back of my mind saying, please don't have Event Horizon, please no Event Horizon. And for me, like I said, the big issue, the issue I had definitely was the ending, only because it's where at one point in time that's where it broke my disbelief. It was beautiful. It was a beautiful destruction of my suspension of disbelief, but it was still my destruction of disbelief and my suspension of disbelief in general. Because it and that's the issue I have with Interstellar. It's kind of funny because I think that might be the issue I have with a good portion of Nolan films, and maybe not a good portion, maybe just at least 2 Nolan films. 'Cause I had the same kind of issue with the ending with Inception, but we've talked about that in commentary, and you can listen to my past discussion on that. But with Interstellar, it was just that little, again, it was such a small, minor thing, and I don't even know how you would have done it in a way that would have not made me angry, or what would have made me pleasant, because I don't think there's a way in the world that you had built and in the world that had happened. I don't think there would have been a way to have gotten out of that sort of ending.
I don't know. But I do want to finish up my previous thought.
Go for it.
Before I lose it.
No problem.
So I was terrified that it was gonna turn into this like, oh no, there's some kind of horrible, terrible thing out in space, and it was gonna turn into a weird horror film that doesn't belong. But mechanically, they introduced this concept, which is fully believable, that they would be, once these explorers went out to their own respective planet, they would be sending off a signal that basically says, "Hey, things are doing great."
Yep, a thumbs up, as they called it.
Yeah, we're awesome. Yep, Come on down.
Yeah, this. The water's fine. Everything's good. We have grass, vegetation. Everything is cool, and that was what was really cool about the film. Especially like my favorite portion was the first one they went down, the whole time dilation, because they had not computed that yet and thought about it. But once they went down, saw the wreckage, they said, "Oh crap!" From our point of view, that was like, that's been for a long time, broadcasting for 7 years or whatever many years. But in actuality, that was the few first seconds as she kind of came into the world. Right. And it's really cool when you start thinking like that. And I thought it was again a good touch of that, because we're only given these glimpses of like, well, here are 4 potential worlds. We can probably visit 2, 3 if we're pushing it. And having to pick those, how you're going to balance time, fuel, and everything else was really cool. Especially, again, for me, like I said, the big one was that ice planet was the one with man, because that was supposed to have the thumbs up. That had everything good and things like that. And then it's revealed that man had faked the data, had faked everything, because he just couldn't comprehend the idea of whatever. Like he kind of snapped himself. He didn't have the resolve. I don't think any person could have that kind of resolve to chill for like 10 years alone, knowing that, oh crap, I picked the wrong one, or I got sent to the wrong one, and I'm still alive here.
Yeah, and that's tough for sure, I would imagine. I mean, I don't know. But and you also just thankfully they didn't go to that weird sunshine place.
Yeah.
But they very likely probably needed some element of conflict or turn, kind of in that vein. So to have this built-in like structural way to say, we have these people, these brave people, who are sent out to do these incredible things on these planets all by themselves, and then to give them just that one, like, if they did not give them the little clicker to check in all the time,
Yeah.
there would be no hope.
Yeah.
They would probably end up being pretty brave because they're there for the science and they just have accepted their fate and they're just there doing their work for science. But because they have that little dup, 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 it gives them that ounce of hope that if, just keep clicking that button. It's lost syndrome all over again. You just keep clicking that button and everything's going to work out just fine, because even if you're on the most desolate planet that nobody could ever live on, somebody might think it's a good planet and they might come save you. So it provided a very interesting framing for this incredibly flawed character that can serve as the antagonism throughout that. So
because we haven't talked about it, I think we should. You sort of you bring it up with the idea of hope. What did you think about? What was your thought when it was revealed that Plan A was a complete and utter sham?
So remind me a little bit with what's going on.
So basically, once our professor character dies, essentially Michael Caine. Michael Caine? Yeah.
Yes.
Michael Caine. His character dies. He says to Murphy that all this is bullshit. All Plan A was total bullshit. Like none of my equations I figured out, but they don't mean a damn thing. I have sent them to their death, essentially. From her point of view. And, what did you think about that? Because, that was such a weird moment. Because out of all the things I saw coming, I kind of saw that the ending coming to a certain way. That one twist I did not see coming. Like, once Plan A was revealed to be this complete and utter, falsity.
Yeah,
that was so hard.
Sure. It was interesting because when they were starting to reveal it, I was thinking, okay, so maybe she didn't know about Plan B, and then so now she's understanding that they have an out if they're not able to find the right planet or something. But to find out that there was never any hope in Plan A and it was all about Plan B, and the fact that the reasoning behind that, which I think is what helped sell that idea, is that, he solved his equations as best he could, but there was still this fundamental thing, missing element that there's no way they could possibly get. That was interesting because it was not a fully unexpected turn, but just the way that they did it, I thought was cool because I wouldn't have guessed,
No, yeah, I thought it was a really cool twist. What I liked about it was that it added a lot of doubt to Murphy and her belief, because she'd already been Murphy up until that point had really still been on the fence of what her father did and things like that. And obviously, for her, from Cooper, Coop's perspective, it was, 3 years tops, but from Murphy's perspective, it's 23 going on more, and that kind of thing was that's so again rough to deal with and to comprehend that your father may have left you and the entire human race to die.
Yeah.
When we as the audience knows that wasn't the case, he was never revealed that information, and it's how do you deal with that? Again, it was such a cool thing because of the, for him and his mindset, he already knows this many years have passed. It is already 23 years. Years have passed. Murphy is my age now. And time has done that because of, all that fun science stuff. But knowing that everything that he thought as a father, that he would see his daughter at least one day, maybe the same age, who knows, that kind of thing. But just having that was his sort of belief, because he wouldn't have, Plan B was such a far-fetched idea for him that he wasn't going to accept Plan B.
Sure.
Plan B was not an option in his mind. Because that's not what he signed up for. He didn't sign up to do Plan B. He didn't sign up to save the human race in that way. He wanted to save the human race in the way it is now. He wanted to do, he wanted to save his family, but everybody else, because that's how, that's what he was sold. That was the dream he was given, which again, that's it was a very interesting moment, because I loved how they had this professor character, how they turned him, immediately from this sort of, figure of hope and figure of science and things like that, to immediately like demonizing him and making him sort of this weirdly flawed, moralistically flawed character.
Yeah, and they do a good job of pointing that out, where, he kind of gave up an element of his humanity to make the ultimate sacrifice of doing something that we feel like pretty much nobody else could do, Yeah,
and it was really that was probably the most believable thing for me in his character, was just that fact of him having this belief that there's no way there's no way this is going to work the way it was, and I really dug that a lot. I believe that portion a good chunk once that happened. What I did like about it, again, the ending for sure. I did like that they had a happy ending, but part of me believed that there was a part of me at that point in the storyline that even though I had an idea of what they were going to do, when that twist happened, almost for a brief second, I was like, they're not going to do that. Plan B is going to be their option, and they're going to have to come to grips with that. And I kind of was excited for that to have been the ending, to be honest.
Yeah, I mean, you just want to see the world burn, and
well, it's not so much I want to see the world burn. It's just when you drop a bombshell like, congratulations, you ain't going home. You ain't going to see anybody again.
Mm-hmm.
Having Man as that character, he was our sort of, like, this guy had come to grips with it, and this is what humanity is going to be like. Because, when that fight ensues and stuff like that, we still have Coop, who still has a little bit of hope, a little bit of that, and then the part of me was like, I wonder what they're going to do with this. I wonder how they're going to have Coop kind of come to grips with the potential, with the, I think that's actually going to happen, that's it. You're not going home. You're stuck here. You better learn to survive and figure out what that future is, because they're gone.
Yeah, we see a ton of stories where, the consequences are built up to such a height that it might be the end of the world or the end of humanity. But here, they definitely portray it in such a way that it doesn't feel like just an empty threat.
Right, and that's why I wish.
It feels like something that could have they could have taken a really weird, interesting approach where it's just like, yep, pretty much everybody's dead now.
That's exactly what I was thinking they were going to do, because I was like, man, I have not seen this ever, and that was my hope, and the little hope. Again, I still like the movie, I still enjoyed the hell out of it, but my hope was like, man, it'd be really cool to see what that kind of movie would be, like what it would be to have this sort of like, now we got to deal with our plan B. Because Plan B was never, Plan B was always this sort of amorphous, like, yeah, we got Plan B. It'll be there just in case Plan A doesn't work. But Plan A is the mission. And then when the wool is pulled away, pulled down, and it's Plan A was nothing more than a piece of cardboard that fell down in the wind. Plan B became the real thing, and that was, for Coop especially, that would have been interesting to see him really coming to grips with the idea that Plan B is the plan, and there's no way of changing that. And I would have hoped to see that, but I understand why they didn't do that, because it's such a hard thing. It's a harder sell to give, I think,
absolutely,
in the universe.
It's far less marketable. Yeah.
Oh God, yes. So, as our kind of last thought, I'm curious, what did you think of the final end scene? Not so much the, obviously, after he goes to all the event horizon and the whole, fifth dimensional space is broken apart, we come to Coop waking up in the future, for lack of better words.
Coopersville.
Coop Town, like Coop Station, which again is named after his daughter, not him. What did you think about that whole, like, him stealing the spaceship and shit like that to meet up with Brandt?
I enjoyed it. Not in the same. It was an exhale from the whole black hole stuff, right? The black hole stuff is just this incredible stuff that's happening, and this was kind of a relief from that. I think it struck a nice balance between kind of like, hey, everything worked out, but also just being like, not everything's perfect, but there's potential for us to grow and expand and evolve as a species, and it also felt, very true to Cooper's character in that he has this human spirit of, I am not satisfied with being kept here, and I need to explore, and I need to do
Cooper
these things.
Cooper as a character has always, what I liked about what it implied with this one, even though it kind of implies the whole there's going to be a sequel kind of thing, even though there's probably not going to be a sequel, I wouldn't really think of it being a sequel, or at least trying to make a sequel to this film. It doesn't really...
Yeah, it didn't...
It only implied that in the idea that we got to go sit, she's waiting for you. You got to go meet up with her, kind of thing. In a very minor sense. What I dug about that is that, our sort of introduction to Cooper as a character is that he sort of was in the wrong time. Like, he's this character that exists in the wrong time. And the idea being that when humanity is not in a certain mindset, like, he is of the opposite. Like, in the beginning, the whole world was in kind of caretaker mode as they declared it. He was in explorer mode. He knew that that's what had to happen. And now that humanity has gone far in space, he's back in explorer mode. And he knows that that's what's in his soul. And that's what I liked about him as a character, is that even him coming back into, I say the future in terms of his perspective of time, even that portion of that time period didn't feel right to him. It didn't feel real. It wasn't what he had set out to, and I really like that they slipped that in at the end for sure. Because I beyond all the science issues that happen, beyond a lot of those weird suspensions, destruction of my suspension disbelief, I still enjoyed the movie. I still thought it was beautifully shot. I thought the cinematography, God, I always say that. I thought everything was beautiful. Even the sound design. We didn't really talk about that a lot, but I thought that was phenomenal, especially when they pulled away the sound. I thought that was probably the most telling, especially when you as they're entering the exploded, I guess, extended kind of ship docking area. I forgot what the name that portion of the ship was called. As they're outside of it, it's silent because there's no sound in space in terms of, at least in that world. But as they entered, all the alarms and things like that, and I really liked how they played, much like what Gravity did, where they played with the presence of sound and the absence of sound well.
Yeah, and that stuff's all great. There have been reports of the sound mix being a little off, which I felt in my screening. Particularly, there were some scenes. You notice it mostly in the scene where Michael Caine's character is dying, where the score is just overwhelming and drowning out the dialogue. I felt that in my screening, but I don't think it was necessarily as bad as a lot of people were reporting it to be. Yeah,
we should definitely say that you watched it in what you watched it in was it 70mm or did you watch it?
I did 35mm.
Yeah, same here. Okay.
But yeah, it was a film print, which was kind of interesting on its own.
Yeah, it was so weird for me because I had not seen a film print in a long time.
Me too.
It was so weird because I was seeing artifacts and weird frame things that I had not seen in a long time, all these noisy kind of film stuff and sort of things that I've seen for years. For years, I had seen burn marks and all this sort of film grain and
the seam where they splice together the reels.
Yes, right, and I've seen that for years for magnitudes of my film going experience, but because I had gotten so used to digital, I had not seen that in a long time, and I was like, what the? Oh, that's right, I'm watching a film print, and it was I had to remind myself that I'm watching a film print for a bit. Well worth a watch. I still enjoyed it. No matter what, I still thought it was a really good movie, and I do think people should see it. Just understand, if you're a real hardcore science person, you may have a minor issue here and there, and you probably won't have enough to kill you. That everything I think all the other things of the film, all the acting and sound design and stuff really, and technical prowess and shots like that really outweigh any minor like science issues that I have, much like with Gravity.
Yeah, and I'm going to try and run through these really quick, but
Sure.
I've got a couple notes. So I ended up going through it and absolutely loving the film pretty much through and through. There was one note that I didn't absolutely love, and it's kind of a minor thing, and I totally understand it, but there were like 2 or 3 moments in the film where they are explaining something. You notice it particularly in that black hole scene, where they're kind of like overly telegraphing, it was him all along.
Yeah.
And then at the same time, they're intercutting with the daughter, and she's also figuring it out. And obviously, it's not at the same time. They're just showing it at the same time, right? Because it makes sense to do that, and it wouldn't make sense to do it any other way. And they build up her character to be smart enough that you could totally believe that she probably eventually figures this stuff out.
Right.
But just the way that it was cut together, something about it felt a little inelegant to me. Just in that it felt like they were showing it in a magical way that, oh, he figured something out. Oh, she figured something out. And it's the same thing.
And at that point, I was already like, you son of a bitch, you fucking did this. And I was kind of in my little, not angry mode, but just like the... my groaning mode, just because I'm like, I wish you, like, again, I don't know how you would have done that type of ending in any other way, and so I give Nolan that credit in terms of that, because I don't know, I couldn't say how I would do it better. I'm not saying that I would do it better than Nolan. Like, that's the only way I can see that scene playing out. And again, it was a visual treat for sure. Like that whole way of explaining time in a physical space, like that is already insane. And I dug that, and I dug like all the stuff I dug enough just outweighs any of those like minor quips that I have, because this is definitely a great movie. And if anything, I guarantee this. Well, okay, because Gravity was last year, right? Like, it wasn't this year. So this is probably gonna be this year's, in terms of like winning technical awards and stuff like that at Oscars. That's probably gonna be this film.
Yeah, and so there was that. I want to make a quick note of there was there were a lot of really fantastic homages and references to 2001: A Space Odyssey, of course. We'll have to talk about that film on some other day, because I have plenty of problems with that film, but it's kind of fantastic in its own right. And so, you have the robots who I think we were mentioning off the recording. When you're first introduced to them, Tars is making the joke about slaving all humans and stuff, and that felt very much like a direct reference to Hal, and saying, hey, look, isn't it kind of funny how in another light Hal could have just been like super sarcastic.
Like, I would have loved to have heard Tars say, what are you doing, Coop? Like, that would have been really funny, and I think that might have been a little too on the nose.
Yeah, that would have been, but I see what you're going for, and
and that's what I liked about him. I did like it, but I will give you that. Like, we definitely should do that. We'll talk out after this in a bit.
Yeah, and so, like, going through the black hole, you also see almost shot for shot out of that end sequence in 2001 when he's going through the crazy time-space thing.
Yep.
And we're getting shots of Matthew McConaughey's face with, like, the reflections across his visor, and it's all really fantastic. And the visuals of going into the black hole with the dust and the void and all of that was super interesting and captivating. And then the last thing I really want to make reference to, because we haven't talked about it yet, and it's so awesome, that sequence where they have to rotate the ship to dock.
Oh, yes.
Isn't that just like the most incredible, crazy thing?
A lot of, because ultimately, like I didn't mention this at the beginning of the film, but at the beginning of the film, they have those sort of what we later learn is like these clips from like that are in the museum of his old house or something like that. But there are these like TV documentary-esque clips that are played at the very beginning. And for me, that took away a little bit of the tension, that meaning, well, something good happened, because these guys are talking about like happened in the past, and they're still alive, so I mean, the human race is still existing. But still, when it had those tense moments like that, they did them great. Like, that kind of shot was like, oh my God, they are figuring out ways to still add tension, even though in the back of my mind, I know this is all going to work out, I think.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I don't know how it's going to work out, but I know it's all going to work out. And it was a really cool shot. I was expecting them at that point that they'd get on the ship and that plan B would have completely failed. Like, the generator wouldn't have kicked in and all the embryos would have been lost. But that would again was my weird belief. But I still thought it was great.
Yeah.
All right, we're out of time, dude. We've hit the marker. Brandt, as always, a pleasure doing the show with you. Tell people where they can find you online, good sir.
Yo, you can find me on Twitter at Gadwag, GATOWAG.
Yes, of course. You can also I think it's also on Tumblr as well, and
Yep.
and a whole bunch of other stuff.
All over the place.
Of course, you can find me. I'm at Vincent404 there on the Twitters. You want to talk about your experiences with Interstellar? Maybe you had an entirely different point of view than Brandt and myself had. You can head on over to CosmicRadio.TV/Cinematalkraphy. There you'll find links to show notes, our Twitter account at Cinematalkraphy, the Gmail account, cinematography@gmail.com. You'll also be able to join in our community discussions. We actually recently launched on the network a complete community section with forums and discussions, stuff like that. We're probably going to do a lot of stuff in cinematography with that, some polls and maybe some outside of movie discussions, just to kind of have a bit of communication with you, the audience. And if you want to join in all that fun and be part of our awesome community, you can head over to community.CosmicRadio.TV. So that's it for today. Stay tuned next time.
Cinema blast off into space.
Shake my head in shame. Can never keep a straight face. I tried to keep a straight face. I tried so hard. I'm like, motherfucker's gonna do something silly. What kind of silly is he gonna do? He's gonna do something stupid silly. This has been a CosmicRadio.TV production. For more awesome shows, head on over to our website, CosmicRadio.TV.